The Elder Scrolls is brimming with strange creatures, things that soar, slither, stalk, and sing. But for every beast we've come to know, there are countless others we've lost. Many were hunted to extinction, others were wiped out by war, blight, or the rise of new peoples. And some, well, they may never have truly existed at all. The first extinct creature is the ammonite, a long-gone aquatic mollusk once native to the vast Etheric Ocean. Though the creature vanished ages ago, their coiled shells remain, and while the creatures who once called the shells home are no more, the shells themselves aren't entirely empty. Found within is raw magicka. Some hold little more than a trace, while rarer specimens rival lesser soul gems in terms of potency. But the shells are fragile, at least magically speaking. Once harvested, they begin to suffer from arcane decay, losing their stored magicka within a month. Worse still, they cannot be recharged, and once spent, they become dull, lifeless, and inert. Another creature that no longer exists is the cliff strider, a large winged reptile closely related to the cliff racers and cliff darters from Vvardenfell. All three species once lived side by side, but unlike their noisier cousins, cliff striders struggled with flight, leading them to primarily lurking on the ground. Although their wings did allow them to glide from high places, true flight wasn't something they could achieve. That didn't stop them from thriving though, and they preyed on a wide range of local fauna, including people. When the time was right, cliff striders built mound-like nests from dung and gave birth to their offspring, called cliff skippers, an adorable name for a not-so-adorable creature. Despite their aggression, foul stench, and infamous screeches, cliff striders were respected in Dunmeri culture, and sometimes even kept as pets, but when threatened, they could violently expel their stomach contents in a spray of stinging acidic bile. In the mid-Second Era, a Balmora native named Thetis Ramaris began selectively breeding cliff striders to strengthen their wings, hoping to one day return them to the skies for good. But by the late Third Era, they were gone, exterminated by the ash blight, alongside several of Vvardenfell's other unique species, such as Nixoxen and Vardvarks, although they can still be found elsewhere, unlike the cliff strider. From the skies to the ocean, we have emperor crabs, colossal, semi-aquatic crustaceans that once roamed the ashlands of Vvardenfell, living alongside the early Chimera. Said to be as large as cathedrals, they were hunted by ashlanders for their meat, and their towering shells were repurposed into structures, inspiring the armour of House Redoran, whose warriors still bear the visual legacy of these ancient beasts. Some naturalists speculate emperor crabs were distant relatives of the common mud crab. Others claim they became mud crabs, devolving after forsaking divine ambitions in favour of more simple earthly pleasures. Today, nothing remains of the emperor crabs but the ruins of their shells and the guardian spirit found northwest of Dawnstar in Skyrim, which is quite a lot compared to this next creature. The Nachorbal was said to be terrifying, rock-skinned insectoids once native to Vvardenfell. According to the Tribunal, the Nachorbal were among the most dangerous pests of their age, plaguing the land until their final defeat at the hands of Vivec. As the legend goes, the last Nachorbal was slain by the warrior poet himself, using his divine spear. The moment was deemed so momentous that a statue commemorating his achievement was raised in Vivec City, immortalizing both the beast's defeat and the god hero's power. As to whether it truly happened that way or is propaganda, I'll let you decide. Either way, the Nachorbal no longer exist. And the same can be said for the Raksu, an extinct species of giant bird once found in Blackmarsh. Distantly related to the terror birds of elsewhere, they were said to stand as tall as a mammoth, with tails as long as wagon tongues. The species was wiped out during the Great Burn, a catastrophic fire started during the Riemann Empire's Blackwater War, As part of a military campaign to destroy the land itself, Imperial forces drained swamps, salted rice fields, and cut down entire forests. But that was nothing compared to what came next. As Imperial sappers burned a peat bog outside the city of Stormhold, a fire that spread through an underground network of detritus, engulfing the region for over 3 years. In that time, entire ecosystems were lost, and the Raksu were among the many known species driven to extinction. The only remnants beyond stories are preserved Raksu feathers and a curious bas-relief found inside a Zanmir temple near Solrest. The relief depicts a great bird, perhaps the Raksu itself, devouring an egg framed by the sun. Some believe it to be a symbol of Argonian reincarnation, while others suggest the Raksu may have held a cultural or even spiritual connection to Sithis, to whom many Zanmirs sought to appease. But whatever the relief once meant is now forgotten, its meaning lost along with the Raksu, and there are still many more creatures who were affected by the Great Burn, creatures that are now extinct. One such creature was the long-legged swamp wolf, which suffered devastating losses during the fires and was ultimately unable to recover. It is believed that out of necessity, the few remaining swamp wolves bred with Blackwood direwolves, passing on certain traits such as their long limbs, but beyond that, nothing of the original species remains. The Hellstrom crocodile was another casualty of the Great Burn. With the swamps drained, the crocodiles had nowhere to escape the advancing fires and were driven to extinction. Though they are all gone, remnants of the creatures live on through the Deadwater tribe, who have cleverly used their remains, turning their charred skulls into deadly traps for hunting animals and people. But while the Great Burn left only ash and ruin behind, in the realms beyond Tamriel, the bones of a far stranger creature exists. The bearers of Fargrave, also known as Gargantuans, are an extinct species of colossal beings, whose origins remains a mystery. Their massive skeletal remains can be found throughout Fargrave, forming a prominent feature of the city's landscape. Some believe they were Daedra, while others suggest they were some other type of otherworldly entity. Fargrave itself is a crossroads in Oblivion, a place where travel between realms is easier and more accessible. It is a desert wasteland surrounded by an auroral sky, and its name, the Celestial Palanquin, comes from a theory about the bearers. According to this theory, the giants once carried Fargrave from place to place, using their immense strength to transport the city across Oblivion. When the city's connections to other realms became permanent, the bearers no longer needed to move it, and so they sat down and never got back up again. Some argue that the 4 gargantuan skeletons are the remains of rival Daedric princes who destroyed each other in battle. Others believe the city was once an acropolis for a race of giant beings. However, the most popular belief holds that the bearers were ancient servants who moved Fargrave for an eternity before finally succumbing to rest when their task was complete. No one truly knows who or what these bearers were, only their bones remain, watching over a city that no longer needs them. With the fall of Tamriel's giants and beasts, we now turn to creatures whose existence is harder to prove, beings born from magic, myth, and ancient memory. Long before the Oldmer, or First Folk, arrived in Valenwood, the forests were home to deadly snake-like beasts known as basilisks. Feared for their venom, they were eventually driven to extinction by the Altmer, but not before leaving a lasting impression. One legend claims the Masken longsword Serpent Strike was tempered with basilisk blood, making the blade especially lethal. There's also Basilisk Powder, a poisonous explosive named in their honor. Whether it was truly made from the creatures or simply borrowed their name, it's every bit as deadly as the beast itself. Even centuries later, basilisk eyes can still be found in the Iliac Bay region, prized in alchemy for their ability to cure paralysis. It's the only real evidence outside of old stories that suggests the creatures even existed, but the same cannot be said for the rest of these mythical creatures. Long before the Somerset Isle became the seat of Altmerry civilization, the land was haunted by beings known as Geatus, or Geatius, depending on who's telling the story. These weren't just monsters, they were ancient godlike spirits said to be shaped from the very stone of the earth, a type of fae or fairy that took the form of towering stone men, always accompanied by minor elemental beings known as sylphim. The Geatus weren't passive spirits either, they waged war against the early Aldmer, forcing them to fight back with everything they had. The hero Torinan led the charge, using ancestral lore and weapons forged from meteoric glass to channel devastating elemental energy, lightning, ice and fire. In just a few years, the Geatus were gone, wiped from the land and pushed into legend. Still, some say they were never truly destroyed. One popular tale claims that during the excavation of the ancient sites of Wanselin, miners disturbed a slumbering Geatus, forcing them to abandon the dig entirely. The Sapiarchs, some of the Isle's finest magical minds, dismiss this as nonsense, but others quietly wonder if some of these earthborn titans might still be out there, waiting to rise again. And if the stone giants were terrifying, they are not alone. Others, stranger still, once roamed the forest of Somerset. Among the strangest fey creatures said to have haunted the early Somerset Isle were the Iliadi, towering forest giants covered in eyes, with heads so riddled with them they could see in every direction at once. Described in ancient texts as looming above the treetops, these bizarre beings weren't just strange, they were deadly. Like the Geatus, the Iliadi waged war against the early Aldmer, but they didn't last long. Torinan once again turned the tide, channeling raw ethereal energy into searing magic that brought the giants down. Within a few short years, the Iliadi were wiped from the forests they once called home. Still, not everyone has let go of the past. Whispered rumours speak of ancient rites buried deep in Somerset's oldest woods, rituals that could bring the Iliadi back. For now though, they remain a forgotten terror, watching from the pages of myth with all those terrible eyes. The Iliadi may be lost to memory, but in other corners of Tamriel, even more unnatural shapes once stirred. In the deep mythic past of the Merethic era, when the green was still wild and untamed, the Bosmer tell of a monstrous being known as the Odd Oaks. These massive, hideous creatures could shift their shape at will, so unnatural, so chaotic, that Ylfir himself was said to have commanded their destruction. Ylfir, god of the green and source of the Green Pact, is often seen as a force of structure and natural order, so to the Bosmer, the Odd Oak's constant shifting was a violation of that order. Though whether Ylfir truly despised their ability to change their form is open to interpretation. What's clear is that the Bosmer saw the Odd Oaks as a threat to their way of life and hunted them to extinction. All that remains of them is their fangs, said to rival those of swamp leviathans. They haven't been seen in a millennia, and most assume the Bosmer fulfilled Ylfir's command, erasing the Odd Oaks from existence. But not all ancient creatures were grand and godlike. Some were smaller, quieter, and faded away almost without a trace. Long before the rise of the Tribunal, there roamed a species now all but forgotten, the Verminous. These small, almost dinosaur-like creatures once skittered across the land, unremarkable in life and quietly swept into extinction long before the Second Era. To most, they were little more than a footnote in natural history, but to Sotha Sil, the father of mysteries, even the smallest fragments of the past was worth preserving. Deep within the calculated stillness of the Clockwork City, he fashioned imitations of these lost creatures, biomechanical constructs known as fabricants. As for what caused the original Verminous to vanish, no one truly knows, but in a way, Sotha Sil resurrected them, a kind of de-extinction, so to speak. In the late First Era, garnet beaks were the bird of choice for the aristocracy of Cyrodiil, especially at the lavish feasts hosted by the Emperor Brazolas Dor. The Topal garnet beak, native to Topal Bay, became a staple on noble tables, prized not just for its meat, but for its dramatic presentation. The birds were drowned in fortified wine before being plucked and served whole, often accompanied by the sight of noble diners draping cloths over their heads, not only to trap the vapours from the wine, but also to contain the viscera and juices that burst from the bird with each bite. Unfortunately, this extravagant indulgence led to the rapid extinction of the garnet beak, and by the time of the Second Era, the species had vanished. Its name reduced to a relic of a decadent past, remembered only by historians who wonder whether such a fate is inevitable when a creature becomes a luxury. In Hammerfell, the gooblet once graced the coastal lands, a flightless bird with shimmering, iridescent feathers. Even before the regatta arrived on Tamriel's shores in the First Era, the gooblet's days were numbered. By the mid-Second Era, the species had vanished entirely, leaving behind only a few rare taxidermied species. However, unlike the garnetbeak, the gooblet's feathers still exist, now worn by priests of Annecy as part of their ceremonial garb, as well as being repurposed into elaborate toys for their feline companions. Though the exact cause of their extinction remains unclear, some speculate that their fate mirrored that of the real-world dodo, a species rendered helpless by hunters and introduced predators, but of course, that's all conjecture. While hunting and introduced predators were common threats, the story of the Isgareth bees highlights a different type of loss, one tied to secrets and desires. Native to the golden shores of Auridon, the Isgareth bees produced a honey unlike any other, sweet golden nectar rumoured to grant immortality with repeated consumption. The prized treasure became a secret indulgence for the Altmer elite, whispered about in hidden circles of power, but during the First or Second Era, the bees mysteriously vanished. Their hives disappeared, and their miraculous honey with them. Yet, whispers still persist. Some say the Altmeri kings and queens still tend to a hidden hive, safeguarded in secret chambers far from mortal eyes. But without proof, the Isgareth bees remain another creature of the past. Not all extinctions, however, were the result of overindulgence or mystery. In the rugged hills surrounding Markarth, the muskox once roamed, a hardy beast adapted to Skyrim's harsh terrain. By the time the Second Era rolled around, however, the muskox was no more. Some attribute its disappearance to the brutal climates of the region, disease, or encroaching settlers and hunters carelessly reducing their numbers. Whatever the cause, the muskox quietly vanished from the land. While there's no concrete evidence, some speculate that the Reachmen may have fashioned their horns into war horns, perhaps even influencing the famed horn of the Reachman itself. Whether this is true or not, one thing remains certain: the muskox is no more. Hydras, with their multiple heads, were said to roam the ancient forests of Valenwood long before the Aldmer even set foot on the province. Though they are mentioned in Mankar Camoran's commentaries on the mysterious Xerxes, there is little concrete evidence to support their existence. The Hydra's myth, however, has left a lasting mark on Valenwood and beyond. For the Altmer, the phrase "lopping off the heads of a Hydra" became a well-known expression, suggesting that some challenges are best tackled piece by piece, addressing one problem at a time. But whether Hydras were real creatures or merely a creation of legend remains an open question, as elusive as the truth itself. While the Hydra's existence remains a mystery, there's another fantastical creature that also reportedly roamed Valenwood. The Hippogriff, a creature that shares a similar uncertain fate to the Hydra. Hippogriffs are majestic beings with the body of a horse and the wings and head of a bird, said to inhabit the dense forests long before the Aldmer's arrival. As with the Hydra, their existence is lost to time, and no definitive evidence has ever surfaced to prove they truly walked the earth. Moving from the forests of Valenwood to the far-off island of Gorn, we find another creature of legendary stature, the bat lizard. The bat lizards were enormous, leathery winged creatures first encountered by Topal the pilot during his voyages in the Merethic era. These giants were said to grow to the size of ships, roaming the lush, mysterious island of Gorn. Some scholars theorize that the bat lizards were an early form of the cliff racer, an evolutionary ancestor of the smaller, more familiar winged creatures found in Morrowind. However, their enormous size and mysterious nature complicates such theories, leading to speculation that they could have been dragons, or something entirely unique to Gorn. At the end of the day, we don't know, and the creatures are also Gorn. As we've seen, Tamriel's wild past is as complex and fascinating as the lands themselves. Creatures, both magnificent and terrifying, have risen and fallen, some swallowed by the passage of time, others lost through carelessness or conflict. Yet, even in extinction, they leave a mark, a trace of their once mighty presence, found in forgotten ruins, ancient tales, and the very fabric of magic itself.